It was a warm Wednesday afternoon when Captain Naomi Carter stepped out of her unmarked police car. She had just returned from a meeting downtown, her crisp uniform reflecting the sunlight. Naomi was one of the most respected officers in the Maplewood Police Department. A tall, confident black woman in her late 30s, Naomi carried herself with an air of authority and grace. Her sharp gaze could size up a situation instantly, and her leadership was admired by all who worked with her. Today, she decided to stop by a small convenience store to grab a quick snack before heading back to the station. The store, nestled at the edge of a worn strip mall, was a familiar spot. Naomi often chatted with the cashier there about the happenings in the neighborhood. As she stepped inside, a faint unease settled over her, though she brushed it off. Perhaps it was just the fatigue of a long day. The cashier, an elderly man named Mr. Kapoor, greeted her warmly as usual. "Good to see you again, Captain Carter," he said with a respectful nod. "Hey, Mr. Kapoor," Naomi replied, flashing a kind smile. "Just grabbing a couple of things real quick." She picked up a bottle of water and a granola bar and made her way to the counter. As she moved toward the register, something caught her attention. A white police officer standing near the back of the store. His arms were crossed, his stance rigid, and his icy blue eyes followed her every move. Naomi frowned slightly. It wasn't often she saw other officers in this part of town, and she didn't recognize him. Still, she tried to shake off the uneasiness. After all, she was a captain. There was no reason to feel intimidated. After paying for her items, she headed toward the exit. Just as she pushed the door open, a voice stopped her in her tracks. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to see some identification." Naomi turned slowly, her expression calm but her pulse quickening. The officer stepped closer, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. His tone carried an unmistakable mix of arrogance and suspicion. The officer, a man in his early 30s with a chiseled jaw and short blonde hair, stared her down. The name on his badge read Officer Eric Hayes. "Can I help you, officer?" Naomi asked, her voice steady but firm. "I saw you acting suspiciously in the store," Hayes replied, his tone cold and condescending. "I'm going to need to see your ID." Naomi blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. Suspiciously? She had picked up a granola bar and a bottle of water, paid for them, and was on her way out. She had done nothing wrong. Her anger simmered, but she kept her composure. "Suspiciously?" she repeated, her voice sharp but controlled. "Officer Hayes, I'm Captain Naomi Carter with the Maplewood Police Department. Unless you have a legitimate reason to ask, I'm not showing you my ID." Hayes's expression darkened, clearly irritated by her refusal to comply. "I saw you handling merchandise as if you were going to steal something. I'm asking you one last time. Let me see your ID." Naomi's blood boiled. Shoplifting? The insinuation was not only baseless but also infuriating. She knew exactly why she was being targeted, and it had nothing to do with her actions. It was the color of her skin. Taking a deep breath, Naomi squared her shoulders and stepped closer, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Officer Hayes," she said evenly, "I've been in this store countless times, and I can assure you, I have never stolen a thing in my life. You need to come up with a better reason for this harassment." Hayes's face hardened, and his grip on his holstered weapon tightened. For a fleeting moment, Naomi wondered if this confrontation could escalate further. But she wasn't about to back down. "Captain, huh?" Hayes sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. "We'll see about that. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Naomi's heart sank. She blinked, stunned, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "You heard me," Hayes said, stepping closer, his contemptuous tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "You're under arrest for suspicion of theft." The small store seemed to close in around her as the weight of the moment hit her. Naomi's mind raced, calculating her next move. She was no stranger to tense situations, but she never expected to find herself at the center of one, especially not like this. Naomi Carter's mind raced as she calculated her next move. As a seasoned police officer, she had been trained for hostile situations, but never in her wildest dreams did she imagine herself on the receiving end of such blatant racism and abuse of power. She knew her rights, but she also understood how quickly things could spiral out of control with one wrong move. "I suggest you reconsider what you're doing," Naomi said firmly, though the faint tremor in her voice betrayed her disbelief. "You're making a huge mistake." Officer Eric Hayes ignored her warning, his expression hardening as he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic clink of the cuffs echoed through the small store. Mr. Kapoor, the cashier, stood frozen behind the counter, his face a mix of horror and helplessness. A few customers who had been browsing moments before now stood paralyzed, their wide eyes fixed on the surreal scene unfolding in front of them. "Turn around," Hayes barked, his patience thinning by the second. Naomi's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The humiliation was unbearable, being degraded in public by someone who should have been her peer, or even her subordinate. She could see the twisted satisfaction in Hayes's eyes, the triumph he felt in exerting power over her. Slowly, reluctantly, Naomi turned her back to him. She raised her hands and placed them behind her head. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around her wrists with a chilling finality. The reality of the situation hit Naomi hard, but she knew this was far from over. She forced her breath to stay steady as Officer Hayes shoved her roughly toward the door. Her wrists ached from the tight grip of the cuffs, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the fire of humiliation burning inside her. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, passers-by turned to watch, their expressions a mix of shock and confusion. It wasn't every day that they saw a high-ranking police officer being marched down the street in handcuffs like a common criminal. The blazing sun bore down on Naomi, adding to the suffocating weight of the moment. Her chest felt tight, but she forced herself to remain calm. She refused to let Hayes see how rattled she was. She could feel his arrogance radiating from him in every step, in the forceful grip on her arm. He was enjoying this far too much. "Officer Hayes," Naomi said, her voice low but steady, "you're making a serious mistake. I'll give you one last chance to walk away from this before it blows up in your face." Hayes smirked, glancing down at her with cold indifference. "Is that a threat, Captain?" He spat, dripping disdain on her title as if it were poison. "Because it sure sounds like one. You think just because you're some big-shot captain, you're above the law?" Naomi gritted her teeth, summoning every ounce of restraint she had not to lash out. She knew exactly what Hayes was trying to do, and she refused to let him manipulate her into reacting. "This isn't about being above the law," she said, her tone sharp but measured. "This is about you abusing your power." Hayes didn't respond, but the smug smirk remained glued to his face. It was clear he had no interest in listening to reason. As they approached his patrol car parked at the curb, Naomi spotted a few pedestrians pulling out their phones and recording the scene. A part of her wanted to scream, to plead with them to believe her, to tell them this was all a horrible mistake. But instead, she held her head high, refusing to let this situation break her spirit. Hayes yanked open the back door of the squad car and roughly shoved her inside without a word. The door slammed shut behind her, and Naomi found herself staring out through the wire mesh divider into the front seat. The air inside the car was stifling, thick with heat and tension. Sweat began to bead on Naomi's forehead, but she refused to show any sign of discomfort. She wouldn't give Hayes the satisfaction. Outside, Hayes leaned casually against the car as he pulled out his radio. His voice crackled over the dispatch system, cold and detached. "This is Officer Hayes, badge number 2947, he announced. "I've apprehended a suspect. Black female, mid-30s, Captain Naomi Carter of the Maplewood Police Department. Charge, suspected theft." Naomi's stomach churned as she heard him reduce her entire career, her years of service, to nothing more than a few detached words in an arrest report. The absurdity of it all gnawed at her. She clenched her jaw, determined not to let the weight of the situation crush her. She had to stay focused. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. A deeper dread began to settle in Naomi Carter's chest as the squad car pulled out of the parking lot with a lurch. She knew this wasn't just about a false accusation. There was something darker lurking beneath the surface. Officer Hayes' demeanor, his calculated actions, everything about this situation felt too deliberate, too venomous. Naomi shifted uncomfortably in the back seat, her hands still cuffed behind her. Her mind raced as she tried to calculate her next move. She had to regain control of the situation before it spiraled further into chaos. The drive to the precinct was agonizingly slow. Naomi watched the familiar streets of Pinecrest pass by, each one etched with memories of her years patrolling and protecting this very community. It was surreal, being dragged through the same streets she had served for so long, but now as a criminal. And for what? A baseless, racist accusation by an officer who seemed to delight in her downfall. When they finally arrived at the precinct parking lot, Naomi's pulse quickened. She had spent countless hours here overseeing officers, leading investigations, and maintaining order. But today, she was being hauled in like a common criminal. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. Hayes yanked open the back door and pulled Naomi out with a force that nearly caused her to stumble. She steadied herself, glaring at him but keeping her silence. Words wouldn't help her now. She needed action. And she needed it fast. As they entered the precinct, heads turned. Officers, detectives, and staff paused mid-stride, their eyes wide with shock as they took in the sight of Naomi Carter, their captain, being marched through the station in handcuffs by one of their own. The tension in the room was suffocating, and Naomi could feel the weight of every gaze. Some were filled with confusion, others with disbelief, and a few even seemed to hold a flicker of judgment. "Captain Carter?" one officer muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Hayes ignored the murmurs and pushed Naomi through the lobby and down the hallway toward the booking area. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let the walls close in on her. She wouldn't let this moment break her. Not here, not in front of the people she had worked with for so many years. At the booking desk, a gruff-looking officer named Greg Foster glanced up from his paperwork. Hayes slapped a stack of forms onto the desk with a casual air. "Got a suspect for processing," Hayes said, his tone almost smug. "Suspected theft." Foster's eyes widened as he realized who stood before him. "Captain Carter? What's going on here?" he asked, his tone a mixture of concern and disbelief. Naomi opened her mouth to respond, but Hayes cut her off before she could utter a word. "Caught her red-handed," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue effortlessly. She was about to walk out of Kapoor's store with stolen merchandise. The room seemed to freeze. Foster stared at Hayes, then at Naomi, clearly struggling to process the accusation. "Is this true, Captain?" Foster asked softly, his brow furrowed in confusion. "No," Naomi said firmly, shaking her head. Her voice was steady, but frustration bubbled just beneath the surface. "It's a lie. I didn't steal anything. This is a gross abuse of power." Hayes leaned in, his face inches from Naomi's. "You can deny it all you want," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice, "but you're going down for this." Naomi's heart pounded as she met Officer Foster's gaze. She wasn't sure what shocked her more, Hayes's audacity to lie so blatantly or the fact that her entire career was crumbling before her eyes, right here in the station where she had built her reputation. Foster hesitated, clearly torn, as he stared down at the paperwork Hayes had dumped on the counter. "Greg," Naomi said, her voice low but resolute, "you've known me for years. You know I would never do something like this." Foster met her eyes, doubt flickering across his face. "I don't know what's going on, Captain, but this looks bad," he admitted with a sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Let's just get you processed, and we'll figure it out afterward." Naomi bit her lip, forcing back the wave of frustration that threatened to overwhelm her. She could see that Foster wasn't fully convinced by Hayes, but he was trapped, just like she was, in a system that demanded compliance with its gears already in motion. Her badge, her rank, none of it mattered in this moment. Slowly, Foster pulled out the fingerprinting kit, his hands moving with routine precision. Naomi's fingers pressed against the cold ink pad, leaving dark impressions on the white paper. The process was humiliating, but she kept her head high. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Naomi's fingers pressed against the cold ink pad, one by one, leaving stark prints on the white sheet in front of her. The humiliation weighed on her like a crushing force. She had stood at this very desk countless times, processing suspects herself. But now, she was the one being processed. Officer Hayes stood a few feet away, arms crossed, a smug grin tugging at the corner of his lips. His eyes gleamed with twisted satisfaction, as though every step of this ordeal was feeding his perverse sense of power. Naomi shot him a sharp glare, silently promising herself that she would not let him get away with this. After the fingerprinting was complete, Officer Foster motioned toward the camera set up by the wall. I'm sorry, Captain, but we need to take a mugshot. Naomi swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain her composure. She stood in front of the camera, the bright flash illuminating her face for a brief moment. It felt as though a permanent scar had been etched into her record, a mark of shame that would follow her forever, whether or not she proved her innocence. As the flash faded, Naomi turned to face Hayes, her eyes narrowing. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice calm but laced with steel. "What's your game here? Do you really think no one's going to figure out this is a setup?" Hayes tilted his head, pretending to be amused by her accusation. "Game? There's no game, Captain," he replied with mock innocence. "I'm just enforcing the law, something you clearly forgot how to do." He shrugged nonchalantly, as if the gravity of the situation meant nothing to him. Naomi could feel her rage building inside her, but she fought to keep it in check. She had seen far too many people lose everything because of reckless decisions made in anger. She wouldn't be one of them. She needed to stay calm, to stay smart. She had to think long-term, even if every fiber of her being wanted to lash out at Hayes in that moment. Before Naomi could respond, Foster spoke up again, his voice hesitant. "Captain, I'm afraid we'll have to hold you in one of the cells until this is sorted out," he said quietly. "I wish there was something else I could do, but rules are rules." Naomi nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. "I understand, Foster. Just do what you have to do," she said, her voice softer than before. Foster led her down the hallway toward the holding cells. The echo of their footsteps on the concrete floors sent a chill through her. She had walked these halls 100 times before, but now they felt cold and alien. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on her, suffocating her with every step. The steel bars of the holding cell loomed ahead, glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. Foster unlocked one of the cells and gestured for Naomi to step inside. She hesitated for a moment, taking in the cold, barren room. A small bench, a toilet, and those unforgiving bars, this was all that greeted her. The reality of her situation hit her like a sledgehammer. She was no longer a protector of the law, but a suspect. Taking a deep breath, Naomi stepped inside. She turned back to face Foster as he shut the door behind her. The metallic clink of the lock echoed in her ears, a sound she would never forget. "I'll get in touch with someone higher up," Foster said, his voice quiet and almost apologetic. "We'll get to the bottom of this." Naomi nodded, but the weight of the situation felt unbearable. She sank onto the hard bench, her mind racing with questions and strategies. How had things spiraled out of control so quickly? Why was Hayes so determined to ruin her? As she sat in the cold silence of the cell, Naomi's thoughts drifted back to the moments before her arrest. Something about the way Hayes had appeared at the store felt wrong. Too orchestrated. It was almost as if he had been waiting for her, biding his time until the perfect moment to strike. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they refused to fit together. She knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about a stolen bracelet. There was something far more sinister at play. Hours crawled by as Naomi sat alone in the cell. The silence was broken only by the occasional clatter of keys or the murmured voices of officers passing through the station. Every second felt like an eternity. She wondered if anyone in the department would stand up for her, or if Hayes had already poisoned their minds with his lies. Just as her thoughts began to spiral, the sound of approaching footsteps broke through the quiet. Naomi sat up, her body tense. She recognized the voice immediately. It was Lieutenant Marcia Thornton, a senior officer she had worked closely with for years. "Where is she?" Lieutenant Marcia Thornton's voice rang sharply through the hallway, cutting through the tense air. "In the back, Lieutenant," Officer Foster replied, his voice hesitant. Naomi Carter's heart pounded as she heard the two officers approach her cell. When Thornton came into view, her expression was unreadable, her sharp green eyes scanning the room before settling on Naomi with a mix of concern and determination. Thornton stopped in front of the bars, her hands resting on her hips. "What the hell is going on here, Carter?" she asked, her tone hard to decipher. Naomi stood and met her gaze, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "It's a setup. Hayes arrested me on false charges." Thornton didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to Foster, who stood awkwardly near the door, shuffling a stack of papers in his hands. "Get her out of here," Thornton said quietly, her voice tight. Foster hesitated, glancing down at the paperwork. Lieutenant. I said, get her out, Thornton repeated, more firmly this time. Naomi's pulse quickened as Foster fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the cell door. The metallic clang of the bars swinging open felt like a small victory, but Naomi knew the fight was far from over. She stepped out cautiously, her eyes never leaving Thornton, who stood with an air of authority that was both comforting and intimidating. Thornton had always been strict but fair, a no-nonsense officer who commanded respect. Naomi couldn't tell if her presence here was a sign of salvation or something else entirely. Come with me, Thornton said, her voice steady as she turned on her heel and walked down the corridor. Naomi followed, with Foster trailing nervously behind. As they moved through the station, the officers they passed shot confused glances in Naomi's direction. She could feel their judgment, hear the whispers that followed her every step. It was as though the very place she had dedicated her career to was now closing in on her, turning against her. They stopped at the end of the hallway, where Thornton opened the door to a small, dimly lit office. She motioned for Naomi to step inside. The room was cramped, its walls lined with old case files and stacks of paperwork. Thornton closed the door behind them, leaving Foster outside, and gestured toward the chair across from her desk. Sit down, she said, her tone hard but not unkind. Naomi sank into the chair, still trying to piece together the whirlwind of events that had landed her here. She opened her mouth to speak, but Thornton held up a hand to stop her. Before you say anything, I need to ask you one question, Thornton said, leaning forward slightly, her green eyes piercing. Did you steal the bracelet? The question hit Naomi like a slap in the face. She had expected more understanding, more trust, but the doubt in Thornton's voice cut deep. No, Naomi said firmly, her eyes locked with Thornton's. I didn't steal anything. Hayes set me up. Thornton studied Naomi's face for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The silence in the room was suffocating. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled a long breath. I believe you, she said quietly but with certainty. Naomi blinked, momentarily stunned. You do? Thornton nodded. I've worked with you for years, Carter. You've never given me a reason to doubt your integrity. But Hayes has always been a loose cannon. This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about his behavior, especially toward officers of color. Naomi's jaw tightened at the mention of Hayes's reputation. She had always known that Hayes had issues with authority, especially when it came from someone who didn't fit his narrow worldview, but hearing Thornton confirm it made her blood boil. So what happens now? Naomi asked, her voice low but her mind racing with questions. She had spent the last few hours being humiliated and treated like a criminal. She wanted answers and justice. Thornton leaned forward, her fingers interlaced on the desk. Now, we handle this carefully. If Hayes is setting you up, we need proof, something solid that will hold up in an investigation. Naomi frowned. Proof? How am I supposed to get proof when I'm the one being framed? Thornton nodded as if expecting the question. We dig. No one pulls something like this without leaving breadcrumbs behind. Just as Thornton finished speaking, the door swung open abruptly. Hayes barged in, his smug grin replaced by a look of indignant anger. What's going on in here? He demanded, his eyes flicking between Naomi and Thornton. Thornton stood slowly, her posture calm but commanding. Officer Hayes, I'm speaking with Captain Carter. Do you have something urgent? Hayes scowled, holding up a folder of papers. I have the paperwork to formally charge her. This little chat doesn't change the fact that she's a suspect in a theft. Naomi clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to lash out. The arrogance in Hayes's voice made her stomach turn. He was so confident in his lies, so certain that he could get away with this. Thornton didn't flinch. We'll see about those charges, Hayes. Right now, I'm handling this. Hayes took a step closer, his face inches from Thornton's. Handling this, you should be supporting your officers, not coddling criminals. That's enough, Thornton said sharply, her voice like steel. If you have a problem with the way I'm handling this, take it up with the chief. Until then, stay out of my way. Hayes glared at her, his face reddening with anger. For a moment, it looked like he might argue, but then he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent again, the tension hanging thick in the air. Naomi let out the breath she had been holding, her pulse still racing. "He's going to come after you, you know?" Naomi said quietly, her voice laced with worry. "He won't let this go. Let him try," Thornton replied, sitting back down. "I'm not afraid of Hayes, and neither should you be." Naomi nodded, though the knot in her stomach remained. Thornton might not be afraid of Hayes, but Naomi knew better than to underestimate him. He had already crossed the line by framing her. Who knew what he would do if he felt threatened? Thornton leaned forward again, her voice lowering. "Listen, Carter, you've got to be smart about this. If you try to confront Hayes head-on, he'll twist it against you. We need to play this carefully." Naomi frowned. "Carefully? You want me to just sit back and let him destroy my reputation?" "No," Thornton said firmly. "But if you go after him without a plan, it'll only make things worse. We'll dig into his records, his past complaints, anything we can find to expose him for what he is." Naomi's mind raced with possibilities. There had to be something, some piece of evidence or a witness that could prove her innocence and bring Hayes down. What about the security footage from the store? Naomi asked suddenly, her mind latching onto the idea. There were cameras everywhere. Maybe they caught something that could clear me. Thornton raised an eyebrow, nodding slowly. "That's a good start. I'll put in a request for the footage. If there's anything on those tapes that proves Hayes was lying, we'll find it." For the first time since this nightmare began, Naomi felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. She just had to hold on long enough for the truth to come to light. "Quinn, he's trying to pin a theft on me. It's getting bad and I need your help," Naomi Carter said into her phone, her voice low and urgent. There was a pause before Quinn Mitchell, her closest ally on the force, replied. "I figured something was off when I saw Hayes strutting around like he owned the place." "What do you need?" "Dig into the case file on that bracelet," Naomi said. "I need everything, who reported it, who logged the evidence, anything that gives us a lead. And we need the store's security footage. There has to be something on it that clears my name." "I'm on it," Quinn replied without hesitation. "I'll meet you at your place tonight. We'll go through everything." A wave of relief washed over Naomi. Quinn had always been the one person she could trust completely. If anyone could help her untangle Hayes' scheme, it was him. Ending the call, Naomi turned to leave the station but froze in her tracks. Standing by the entrance was Hayes, surrounded by a group of officers. He locked eyes with her, a smug grin spreading across his face, his expression dripping with condescension. Naomi straightened her shoulders and walked past him, her heart pounding but her expression calm and unreadable. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing how much his petty power play rattled her. Stepping outside into the crisp night air, she inhaled deeply to steady herself. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that evening, Naomi sat at her kitchen table, staring at a pile of papers scattered before her. Quinn had managed to pull the incident report, but so far nothing stood out. The security footage request was still pending, and Naomi's patience was wearing thin. "This doesn't add up," Quinn said, leaning back in his chair, his brows furrowed as he studied the file. Whoever filed this report knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Naomi nodded, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Hayes has been doing this for years. He knows how to manipulate the system, but there has to be something he missed. We just haven't found it yet." Quinn drummed his fingers on the table, deep in thought. "What about the store owner? Have you talked to him?" "Not yet," Naomi replied, her mind flashing back to the tense moment in the store. The clerk had looked terrified, but something about his reaction felt off, almost rehearsed. "But I'm planning to. I think he knows more than he let on." Quinn nodded, his expression determined. "Then we pay him a visit tomorrow. If he's in on this, we'll get him to talk." The next morning, Naomi and Quinn pulled up to the small jewelry store where the alleged theft had taken place. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with the weight of what they were about to uncover. Naomi's stomach churned as she stepped out of the car. The humiliating memories of her arrest played on a loop in her mind. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. Behind the counter, a nervous-looking man in his 50s froze when he saw her. His face went pale. "See, can I help you?" He stammered, his eyes darting nervously between Naomi and Quinn. "We need to talk," Naomi said, her voice steady but firm. "About what happened the other day." The clerk swallowed hard, visibly uneasy. His gaze flitted around the store as though searching for an escape. "I already told the police everything I know. I don't want any trouble." Naomi stepped closer, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "You're already in trouble if you're involved in this setup," she said. "Now's your chance to come clean before things get worse." Quinn crossed his arms, his presence adding weight to Naomi's words. The clerk's hands shook as he wiped his forehead with a trembling handkerchief. "I didn't have a choice," the clerk finally admitted, his voice shaking. "Hayes came in here last week. He told me I had to report the bracelet missing and said he'd take care of the rest. I didn't ask questions, You lied because Hayes told you to." Naomi interrupted, her anger simmering just below the surface. "Do you have any idea what he's trying to do to me?" The clerk looked down, guilt washing over his features. "I didn't know it was going to turn into this," he muttered. "I'm sorry, but I can't take it back now. It's already in the system." Naomi's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream at the man, to throw his cowardice back in his face. But she forced herself to stay calm. This wasn't about him. It was about Hayes. Quinn stepped forward, his tone firm. "We'll need you to make an official statement. If you cooperate, maybe we can work something out. But you're going to have to come down to the station with us." The clerk looked like he might collapse under the weight of his guilt, but nodded reluctantly. Naomi exhaled, a mixture of anger and relief coursing through her. They had a witness now, proof that Hayes had orchestrated the entire setup. As they left the store, Naomi's phone buzzed. It was Thornton. "I've got the security footage," Thornton said. "Meet me at the station." Naomi's heart raced. This was it, the break they needed. But as she and Quinn drove toward the station, a knot of unease settled in her chest. Hayes wouldn't go down without a fight, and she had no idea how far he'd go to protect himself. "If you cooperate, maybe we can cut you a deal," Quinn said, his tone firm but measured. "But you'll have to come down to the station with us." The clerk looked like he might collapse, his face pale and his hands trembling. He nodded reluctantly, regret pooling in his eyes. Naomi turned to leave, her mind racing through the next steps. They had a witness now, someone who could expose Hayes for the manipulative, corrupt officer he was. But she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Hayes still had the upper hand, and she had no doubt he would fight tooth and nail to keep his secret buried. As they left the store, Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a message from Thornton. "I've got the security footage. Meet me at the station." Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the evidence that could finally clear her name. But as she and Quinn drove toward the station, a heavy feeling settled in her chest. Hayes wasn't the type to back down. If he knew they were closing in on him, he'd retaliate, and Naomi couldn't predict how far he'd go to protect himself. Naomi's mind raced as she and Quinn pulled into the station parking lot. The gravity of the situation pressed down on her. They had the witness, someone who could help expose Hayes, and now they had the security footage. If it was intact, it could be the key to clearing her name. But Hayes wasn't going to go down without a fight. He had too much influence, too many connections within the department. They needed to act quickly, before Hayes could make another move. As soon as they stepped out of the car, the tension around the station was palpable. Officers moved about, but the usual chatter and energy of the precinct were subdued. It was as if everyone knew something big was happening, but didn't want to acknowledge it. "Let's make this quick," Quinn muttered under his breath. "The last thing we need is for Hayes to figure out what we're up to." Naomi nodded, her heart pounding as they headed inside. She kept her head low, avoiding eye contact with the officers they passed. Her senses were on high alert. She could feel their stares, their whispered conversations, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting to Thornton and reviewing the footage. They found Thornton waiting in the evidence room, a small dimly lit space in the back of the station. Her face was grim, her eyes darting nervously toward the door, as though expecting Hayes to burst in at any moment. "I pulled the footage," Thornton said quietly, handing Naomi a flash drive. "But there's something you need to know." Naomi's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Thornton ran a hand through her hair, clearly struggling with how to phrase her answer. It's edited. The footage is incomplete. It shows you in the store, but the key moments are missing, like the part where you supposedly stole the bracelet. Naomi cursed under her breath. Hayes had gotten to the footage first. Of course he had. He was always one step ahead, always manipulating the situation to his advantage. Quinn's jaw tightened. We need to find the original tape, he said, his voice low and urgent. There's no way Hayes could have gotten rid of it that fast. It has to be somewhere. Thornton nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. I'll keep digging, but you two need to be careful. Hayes knows you're onto him. He's going to come after you. Naomi's mind was racing. Hayes had the power to ruin her career, but he couldn't erase the truth. If they could find that original footage and expose him, it would be over for him. But they had to act fast. Let's split up, Quinn suggested, his tone serious. We'll cover more ground that way. You take the witness to a safe location. I'll keep working on tracking down the footage. If anything goes wrong, we regroup here. Naomi agreed, though a knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach. She hated the idea of splitting up, but Quinn was right. Every second they delayed was another second Hayes could use to cover his tracks. Later that night, Naomi was driving through the city with the witness, the jewelry store clerk, sitting in the passenger seat beside her. The man was visibly shaking, his fear practically radiating off him. You'll be safe, Naomi said, trying to keep her voice calm. We're almost there. The clerk nodded but kept glancing nervously out the window. His fear was contagious, and Naomi couldn't help but feel it creeping into her own mind. She checked the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see Hayes tailing them. Her phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a message from Quinn. I might have a lead on the footage. Keep your phone close. Naomi gripped the wheel tighter, her focus shifting between the road ahead and the gnawing sense of danger that hung in the air. If Hayes knew they were onto him, he wouldn't hesitate to strike back. As they neared the safe house, Naomi glanced at the clerk. He was pale and silent, his hands clutching the edges of the seat as though bracing himself for impact. It's going to be okay, Naomi said, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to reassure him or herself. Naomi glanced at the clerk sitting beside her in the car, his face pale and his hands gripping the edge of the seat. She couldn't blame him. He'd been dragged into something much bigger than he could have ever anticipated. His life was at risk now, just as much as hers. We're almost there, Naomi said, trying to keep her voice steady. I've got a safe house set up for you. You'll be protected until we figure out our next move. The man nodded, but his eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror, as if expecting someone to be following them. Naomi's nerves were on edge too. She couldn't shake the sinking feeling that Hayes was already watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. She checked her mirrors constantly, half expecting a black SUV to appear behind them. Her phone buzzed on the dashboard. She quickly picked it up and put it on speaker. I've got a lead, Quinn said, his voice tense. I think I know where Hayes is keeping the original footage. It's at his house. He must have taken it there before editing it. We need to move now if we're going to get it before he destroys it. Naomi's heart raced. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. But breaking into Hayes's house was risky. He was a cop, and if they got caught, it could cost them everything. Their careers and possibly their lives. We don't have a choice, Naomi said, more to herself than to Quinn. I'll meet you there. She turned the car around, heading toward the outskirts of the city where Hayes lived. The clerk's wide eyes locked on her, panic clear on his face. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice trembling. No, Naomi admitted, but it's our only option. When they arrived at Hayes's house, the tension was unbearable. The street was eerily quiet, with only the occasional hum of a car passing by in the night. Naomi parked a few blocks away, not wanting to alert anyone to their presence. Quinn was already waiting for them, crouched behind a bush near the property. His face was set with determination. We're going in through the back, Quinn whispered. There are no security cameras there, but we need to move fast. Hayes could come home at any moment. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding as they crept through the darkness. The house loomed ahead, a two-story structure with tall windows that looked like empty, watchful eyes. They reached the back door, and Quinn quickly went to work on the lock. Within moments, the door clicked open and they slipped inside. The house was dimly lit, and every creak of the floorboards felt deafening in the silence. Naomi's nerves were on fire as they made their way through the hallways. Each step felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. Finally, they reached Hayes's office. Quinn gestured for Naomi to keep watch, while he rifled through the desk, searching frantically. "Got it," Quinn whispered, holding up a small unmarked flash drive. "This has to be it." Before they could celebrate, a loud crash echoed from somewhere in the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. "Hayes is home," Naomi hissed. "Go." They bolted from the office, their hearts pounding as Hayes's voice shouted from behind them. Naomi's hand instinctively reached for her gun, but there wasn't time to turn back. They burst through the back door and into the night, running as fast as they could toward the car. Shots rang out behind them, the sharp cracks of gunfire tearing through the air. Naomi's pulse raced as she ducked behind the car, pulling the clerk down with her. "We need to get out of here now," Quinn shouted, firing back at Hayes as he closed in. Naomi scrambled into the driver's seat, her hands shaking as she started the engine. Quinn dove into the passenger seat just as another shot shattered the rear window. They sped off into the night, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Naomi swerved around a corner, her heart pounding in her chest. The gunfire had stopped for now, but she knew Hayes wouldn't let them go so easily. "We need to get to a safe place," Quinn said, his voice shaky but firm. "Somewhere we can regroup and figure out our next move." Naomi nodded, her mind racing. They had the flash drive, but now they needed someone they could trust to help them expose Hayes. The department had become a nest of corruption, and she couldn't risk relying on anyone from within. "Let's head to my aunt's place," Naomi said suddenly. "She's out of town, and it's off the grid. We can lay low there." Quinn nodded, and they sped off into the darkness, their path illuminated only by the dim glow of the streetlights. There was no turning back now. "She's out of town, and it's completely off the grid. We can lay low there until we figure out our next move," Naomi said firmly. Quinn nodded in agreement, and they sped through the city, taking winding side streets to avoid any chance of being followed. Naomi's heart raced as she constantly glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see flashing police lights pursuing them. After what felt like an eternity, they finally arrived at Naomi's aunt's secluded house. Hidden from the main road, it was surrounded by dense woods, offering the perfect cover. Naomi parked the car in the back, out of sight, and they hurried inside, locking the door behind them. The silence in the house was deafening. Naomi leaned against the door, taking a moment to catch her breath. "Let's see what's on this drive," Quinn said, already pulling out the flash drive. They set up Naomi's laptop on the kitchen table, the screen casting a dim glow in the darkened room. As the files began to load, Naomi felt the weight of the entire situation pressing down on her. If they couldn't expose Hayes, she would forever be branded a criminal. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of clips from the jewelry store. But the edits were glaring. Crucial moments were missing. Moments that could have proven Naomi's innocence. "He thinks he can just erase the truth," Naomi muttered, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "Look at this," Quinn exclaimed, pointing to a timestamp on the footage. "This shows when you were in the store, but the part right before it, completely gone." Naomi gritted her teeth. "He's trying to bury the evidence. We need to get the originals from the store and confront him." Just as they began to formulate a plan, Naomi's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, her heart sinking as she read the message from an unknown number. "We know where you are. You can't hide." A chill ran down her spine. "Quinn, we need to get out of here. Hayes is on our tail," she said urgently, her voice shaking. "Right behind you," Quinn replied, grabbing his gun and tucking it into his waistband. They slipped out the back door, crouching low and scanning their surroundings. The night was eerily quiet, but then, suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness. "It's him," Naomi whispered, adrenaline surging through her veins. "We need to act fast." They crept around the side of the house, staying low to avoid being seen. The crunch of tires on gravel sent Naomi's heart into overdrive as Hayes's car came to a stop in the driveway. "Get ready," Naomi breathed, gripping her weapon tightly. The sound of a car door slamming echoed through the stillness, followed by Hayes's booming voice barking orders into his radio. "This is Officer Hayes. I'm in pursuit of 2 suspects. They may be armed and dangerous," he announced. Naomi exchanged a tense glance with Quinn. "This is our moment," she whispered. "We have to confront him before he can call for backup." "On 3, Quinn said. 1, 2, 3. They burst out from behind the bushes, guns drawn. "Hayes, drop your weapon," Naomi shouted. Hayes turned, surprise flashing across his face before it morphed into anger. "You think you can point a gun at me? You're in deep trouble," he sneered. "Not as deep as you," Naomi shot back, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "We know what you did." Hayes snarled, raising his gun. But Quinn fired first, the bullet grazing Hayes's shoulder and sending him stumbling back with a curse. "Get inside," Quinn yelled. They bolted for the house, adrenaline pumping as Hayes's shouts echoed behind them. Inside, Naomi booted up her laptop again while Quinn kept watch at the door. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder. Time was running out. Come on, Naomi urged, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She opened the unedited footage, her breath catching as she clicked to upload it to the cloud. "Naomi, hurry," Quinn called, his eyes darting toward the window. Just then, the front door burst open with a deafening crash. Hayes stormed in, his face a mask of rage. "You think you can run from me?" he roared, raising his gun. "Quinn, get down." Naomi yelled, diving to the side as bullets shattered the kitchen window. Quinn returned fire, hitting Hayes in the leg. He let out a howl of pain but still tried to keep his gun steady. "You'll regret this," Hayes spat, staggering back. "Upload it," Quinn shouted, moving to shield Naomi. "We can't let him take you down for something you didn't do." With a final desperate click, Naomi felt a wave of relief as the footage finished uploading. "It's done," she yelled. "Let's go," Quinn shouted, pulling her toward the back door. They sprinted into the woods behind the house, not looking back as the sound of sirens and shouts closed in. The night air was cold against Naomi's skin, but she didn't stop. They had what they needed. The truth was finally out. As they dashed through the trees, Naomi's mind raced. They weren't safe yet, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a spark of hope. Hayes's lies were about to unravel, and justice was within reach. The night air was thick with tension as Naomi and Quinn ran, their hearts pounding in unison. They needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Hayes to regroup and formulate a plan. But with Hayes wounded and furious, Naomi knew the chase was far from over. Her mind raced as they dashed through the dense woods. They had the evidence to expose Hayes, but the fight wasn't finished yet. Glancing at Quinn, who was keeping pace beside her, she knew they couldn't stop. They had come too far to let this slip away now. The truth had to come out, no matter what. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, and Naomi's stomach dropped. They couldn't afford to slow down. They needed to stay ahead. The outcome of this night would leave everyone speechless, and she was determined to make sure of it. As they burst through a clearing, Naomi spotted a small, dilapidated cabin in the distance. "Over there," she shouted, pointing. "It's a long shot, but it'll have to do," Quinn urged, leading the way as they sprinted toward the cabin. They reached the door just as they heard the sound of an engine revving in the distance. Hayes wasn't far behind. Naomi and Quinn slipped inside, locking the door and peering through the grimy windows. Breathing heavily, they crouched in silence, ears straining for any sound. The tension in the air was suffocating, each creak and rustle outside sending a jolt of anxiety through Naomi. Suddenly a loud crash erupted outside. Naomi's heart stopped as she turned to see Hayes burst through the front door, his gun raised and his face twisted with fury. "You think you can hide from me?" Hayes roared, his eyes wild with rage. Quinn fired without hesitation, the bullet hitting Hayes in the shoulder. Hayes stumbled back, cursing in pain but refusing to stop. "You're done, Naomi," Hayes bellowed, his voice dripping with venom. "You're nothing but a criminal, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." Naomi and Quinn held their breath as Hayes staggered but pushed forward, clutching his wounded shoulder. The room was thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. They had the evidence, but now it was a fight for survival. "Get ready," Quinn yelled, his voice urgent. "We can't let him take you in." Fueled by rage, Hayes ignored his injuries and pressed forward, his eyes burning with unbridled hatred. You think you can just waltz in and turn the tables? You're a thief, Naomi. I'll destroy you. In one swift motion, Hayes raised his gun again, but Quinn was quicker. His next shot hit Hayes squarely in the leg, sending him crashing to the ground. Hayes's weapon clattered away out of reach. Now, Quinn shouted, grabbing Naomi's arm. Let's get out of here. They bolted through the back door, just as the sound of sirens filled the air. The cacophony of flashing lights and wailing sounds engulfed the cabin, but Naomi and Quinn didn't stop running. Their hearts pounded, adrenaline surging as they dashed through the woods. Naomi felt a glimmer of hope as she clutched the flash drive in her pocket. They had the footage. They had a chance to expose Hayes for the corrupt officer he was, and finally clear her name. After what felt like hours of running, they stumbled onto a dirt road. In the distance, they saw flashing lights from approaching police cars. This way, Quinn shouted, waving his arms to signal one of the patrol cars. The officer inside quickly pulled over, his eyes wide with concern as Naomi and Quinn approached, breathless. Hey, we need help, Naomi yelled, her voice strained. There's a corrupt officer, Hayes. He's been framing me. The officer stepped out, his hand hovering near his gun. Slow down. What's going on? Quinn spoke quickly, urgency in his voice. We have evidence on this flash drive. It proves she's innocent and exposes Hayes's corruption. He's in that cabin right now. Before the officer could respond, a commotion erupted behind them. Hayes, bloody and desperate, staggered out of the cabin, shouting at the top of his lungs. You can't trust them, he bellowed, charging toward the road like a madman. Step back, the officer commanded, raising his gun. Get on the ground. Naomi's heart pounded as she watched the tense scene unfold. The officer's voice was firm, but Hayes refused to back down, his defiant glare fixed on Naomi and Quinn. The footage, Naomi shouted. You need to see the footage. The officer hesitated, glancing between Naomi and the enraged Hayes. But as Hayes raised his weapon again, aiming it at the officer didn't wait. The gunshot rang out, echoing in the night. Hayes crumpled to the ground, his weapon falling from his hand as blood pooled around him. Call for backup, the officer yelled into his radio, kneeling beside Hayes. Naomi's breath came in shallow bursts as she clutched the flash drive tighter. She turned to the officer, her voice trembling but resolute. Please, she said, holding out the drive. This will prove everything. The officer nodded, his expression serious. We'll look into it right away. As more patrol cars and officers arrived, Naomi finally felt the weight of the night lifting. Hayes's reign of manipulation was over. The fight wasn't finished. But Naomi knew the truth was finally coming to light. Naomi gasped, fear washing over her as Hayes crumpled to the ground. His wide, disbelieving eyes stared up at the night sky as his gun slipped from his hand. The forest fell eerily silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Call for backup. The officer shouted, kneeling beside Hayes to check his pulse. Stay here with him. I'll handle this. Naomi and Quinn exchanged stunned looks, neither of them daring to believe it was finally over. They stood frozen as the minutes dragged by, feeling each second stretch like an eternity. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, and soon, patrol cars swarmed the area. Flashing lights painted the woods in shades of red and blue, and the crackle of radios filled the air. Naomi felt a confusing mix of relief and dread. Would they believe her? Would they see the truth? As a group of new officers approached, Naomi stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. You have to listen, she said, her voice trembling but firm. We have evidence against Officer Hayes. He's been framing me for a crime I didn't commit. One of the officers, a woman with a calm but authoritative demeanor, nodded. Show us what you have. Naomi handed over the flash drive, her hands shaking. It's all on here. The real footage from the jewelry store. Everything you need to know is there. The officer nodded again and passed the drive to a colleague. Get this uploaded and reviewed immediately. As they waited, Naomi felt a flicker of hope, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The truth was finally on the verge of coming out. Hayes would face justice, and she would be free of the shadow he had cast over her life. When the officer returned, her expression was serious but resolute. The footage confirms your story. Hayes has been under investigation for months for misconduct, but this is the proof we needed. Tears of relief welled in Naomi's eyes. She had been holding everything inside for so long, and now the weight was finally lifting. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As the officers began taking statements and collecting evidence, Quinn gave Naomi's hand a reassuring squeeze. "You did it," he said softly. He stood up to him. Naomi shook her head, smiling through her tears. "I couldn't have done it without you." In that moment, standing amidst the swirling chaos of flashing lights and busy officers, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. The nightmare Hayes had created was finally over. As the scene began to wind down, Naomi took one last look at the cabin. It stood as a haunting reminder of the dark and dangerous path she'd been forced to walk. But now, she could finally move forward, her head held high. She stepped into the glow of the police car's headlights, ready to face whatever came next. The battle had been grueling, but the victory was hers, and it was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more powerful and thought-provoking tales. Also, let us know where you're watching from and the time of day. It helps build a stronger community. See you in the next story.